Certain activities are taken to be sort of worldly, mundane, interesting activities in normal everyday life, actually have or can have a really deep spiritual purpose to them that we may not even recognize at the time. So I thought I would just talk about a few things, some taken from my own life that I only much later discovered were important in a spiritual sense as well. I thought I was just, living my life and not particularly concerned about spirituality at all. And only years later did I discover that some of these activities had real value in that journey. So in high school, I was big into swimming, and our high school swim team had a coach. The only thing was he himself couldn't swim, literally couldn't swim. I began swimming competitively when I was, I think, 13. And all the way through high school, I never had a coach that could swim at all. My swimming was self-taught, which turned out to be a good thing because it was something that I had to learn almost from the inside out. It was almost what I discovered much later, that it was being mindful of how my body was moving and how it felt inside. So it wasn't, I didn't learn it from outside instruction, like verbal instruction, do this with this arm and that with that leg. And it wasn't like that at all. It was just purely by feeling and what felt smooth or comfortable. And anything that felt discordant was, I tried to learn to not do that. And so that's how I learned to swim. In high school, I swam butterfly. That was my stroke. And someone like years into it, like 3 or 4 years into swimming competitively with a stroke, someone asked me, how many times do you kick for each stroke? And I didn't know. I had to jump in the water and pay attention to how many times I kicked, because I didn't think of it in that sense. It wasn't a mental structure. It was totally by feel. Much later, that was actually a form of mindfulness. And we can take activities that don't seem to be related to spirituality at all. And there is, if we're paying attention, focused on what's happening versus the story about should and shouldn't. I'm not saying coaching isn't helpful. I mean, I probably could have benefited from that, but what I did learn was perhaps even more valuable. So that was one example. When I was growing up in high school, they had a pool table in the YMCA. I never played. It sort of had a reputation. Certain kinds of kids played, down at the Y. And so I never did. But in college, for probably 2.5 years, I got intrigued with this game of billiards, which is similar to pool, a little different. But I'd play for, 4 hours a day, maybe 5. Part of it was an avoidance of studying, but it was quite intriguing. And what was intriguing about it was that it was the first time in my life that I experienced flow. When the flow was happening, you could play remarkably well, almost flawlessly. And then a thought might come in like, oh, I'm really playing well now. And then it would break the flow, right? Because it became a mental element was introduced into the activity. So that was my first introduction to being able to function in a way that seemed to have just a flow to it, an ease to it. And the difference between that and being in my head and thinking about what I was doing. So that I found that quite compelling, compelling enough to spend 4 hours a day playing it. Okay, late 20s. I earned a living for several years painting houses. I never liked to use spray equipment, and that was all too messy. So this was by hand brush, right? The sort of old fashioned way. And so I probably over those years, I think I counted up one time several hundred houses that I painted. The skill of house painting, you can learn that in a few months, right? But I continued to do this over a period of time. And the activity was essentially looking at a blank wall all day. And your body knew how to do this. Your body knew how to paint, move the brush, get the paint on the brush and paint the house. So the body was engaged in a way that didn't require thinking. And so the mind was just, you were able to be all day with whatever arose in the mind. It was really a form of meditation. Just giving the body something to do that it knew how to do. And then there was, the only other thing happening was what was happening in the head. And you were present for that because there was nothing else to do other than look at a blank wall, hours at a time. At the time, I didn't know it was meditation. I just thought it was a decent way to be outdoors and be independent and earn, half decent money. So I was good with that. But years later, I recognized that it really was a form of meditation that I did for 8-10 hours a day for over 4 or 5 years. Okay, so some other examples that I wasn't involved in, but I find interesting. So, if you watch basketball, one of the things that have developed in basketball over the last maybe 20 years or so is this trash talk, right? People getting in each other's face, insulting them, insulting their mothers, whatever. And so, you can see that in terms of intimidation or aggressiveness or whatever, but it's really to get the other person in their head, right? Get them out of the zone and into thinking about something other than just being present with the game that their body is highly skilled at. So it's just getting, trying to seduce them back into their mind and get them out of the zone, right? So you can see the same thing with, old Western movies and gunfights on Main Street. They don't start shooting right away. They spend a minute or two sort of, trying to get the other person off their game, get the other person to be thinking about the consequences, the possibility of their imminent death. And so, that's the purpose of it, to throw people off. So we can see this in different activities, but we can also notice it in our own lifetime, where we can be engaged in something, some activity, and there can be something that pulls us out of that activity and up into our thinking mind, where we can create problems, where we can create opinions, where we can decide what other people should and shouldn't be doing. It gets us worked up. It gets us, into the idea of blame. Whether we remember a person that we're not willing to forgive. We can be pulled out of our zone, our flow. So there was a baseball player, I don't know, back a ways, a few decades back, Reggie Jackson. He was called Mr. October. They played the World Series in October, postseason games. And the reason he was called that is because when he was in really clutch situations, he would hit a home run or win the game. And so it was sort of his ability to get beyond all of the possible thoughts that could have occurred about, what would happen if he succeeded, or if he didn't, or if he failed, what would people think of him? Would it be good for his career? I mean, all these things that you could possibly think about, when what was really needed is just to be present for the next pitch, right? That's what was required. So someone who could really succeed in those situations where it was really a clutch situation with a lot of, consequences in the baseball world, apparently sort of tune out all of those possible outcomes and just stay with that present moment and what was needed in that present moment to do his best, right? So, okay, let's see another example, skiing. So, I mean, there's learning to ski. I mean, there's a certain level of conditioning that the body requires in order to, the basics, learn how to ski. Right? And then at some point, the body has become conditioned to know how to do that. And then what's the enjoyment from that point on is that you're sort of gazing downhill, and you're not thinking your way downhill. You're just present, sort of a wide panoramic vision of what's downhill, and moving as the terrain requires, right? And there's not, you can watch people that are trying to do it from their head, trying to think about how they move this way or this foot or this, leaning this way or that way. And it looks contrived, it doesn't look fun. But if there's sort of a being present with it without, just dropping down from the head into just the awareness and the perception, and the body knows how to move. And then there's great joy in that. So the same thing can be true with just driving. I think most people enjoy driving a car, right? Maybe not in a city or traffic, but generally, driving down a pleasant county road. Most people, I think, find that enjoyable. And I think the reason is that you don't have to think to do it, right? You learn the traffic rules, okay. You learn how to operate the car, yes. But at some point, you can drive well, very well, just in being aware, gazing down the road in front of you. This is awareness, right? Awareness in the body's ability to perceive, and your innate ability to be aware of what's being perceived by the mind. And then you react as needed. If a car suddenly comes out of a side street, you react to that because that's within the field of awareness, within the perception of the body. Right? So it's a pleasant activity because it doesn't require us to be operating from our head up. We don't have to be thinking about, moving the steering wheel just so, and how fast am I going, and how long will it take me to stop? And, we're not doing those calculations in our head. We have a sense of how to move in that environment. And the awareness is sufficient. We trust it. We do it already. We can function in perfectly well without involving much thought. We perceive, we see what's needed. The body knows how to move, and that's an enjoyable way to live. And we need this mental superstructure to be imposed on life circumstances much less than we imagine that we do.